Now, this next story is an unbelievable one. When Benita Alexander met acclaimed surgeon Paolo Macchiarini in 2013, she thought, and understandably, she had met the man of her dreams.
Charming, intelligent and a pioneer of groundbreaking new surgery, Paolo was celebrated as one of the world's brightest minds.
But all was not what it seemed. A new Netflix documentary, Bad Surgeon Under the Knife, tells the incredible true story of how Paolo conned the world. But before we chat to Benita about what happened, let's take a look.
I was engaged to a monster.
Paolo was an absolute fraudster, and that's why we have to stop him.
Paolo Macchiarini treated people as human lab rats.
The first liver transplant, the first kidney transplant, the first heart transplant, did they go all well? No. I think that this is the future.
Was this guy a superhero, a super surgeon, and the love of my life? Or was he a dangerous con man and a killer?
I mean, it's fascinating. Benita joins us live from New York. Good morning, Benita. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Take us back to the very beginning. When did you first meet Paolo, and what were your first impressions of him?
I first met him in 2013 when I was working on a story about regenerative medicine, which is this very exciting, promising field where basically we're working to the point where you make new organs in the lab for people so that we get rid of organ donation and eliminate a whole host of problems. And he was at the forefront of this field. He was considered the pioneer in this field. His nickname was the super surgeon, the miracle man. He worked at Karolinska in Stockholm, the place that awards the Nobel Prize in Medicine. He was rumored to be in contention for a Nobel Prize himself. And he was considered to be a daring pioneer. He was taking risks that nobody else in the world was willing to take, doing something that literally nobody else in the world was doing. And he seemed to be incredibly devoted and caring, and incredibly devoted to giving hope to people who had no other hope. So he was a very intriguing man.
And Benita, you're an investigative journalist yourself, so you are the first thing you're going to do is think about asking, not necessarily be cynical, but ask questions about the person you're going to meet. So I don't imagine you chucked yourself into this like lock, stock, straight away.
No, of course not. And at the time, though, in 2013, there was no negative information revealed publicly yet about Dr. Paolo Macchiarini. He was the super surgeon. He was this very innovative, daring medical pioneer that almost had a reputation like he walked on water. I mean, people thought he was like a god. I mean, he was bringing so much prestige and accolades and money and everything else to Karolinska. And they were talking about building a whole institute around him and these groundbreaking procedures he was doing. And people were in awe of him.
And you were in awe of him, Benita, because from that first moment you met, it was that kind of, that magnetic attraction. You know, he was charming, he made that eye contact with you immediately, and you kind of like had to kind of go, oh, hang on a minute, I'm here to interview him. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, before I met him, I had obviously done a lot of research. I had read a lot about him. I had seen TV interviews with him. He was interviewed all the time. He had been the subject of many documentaries. There was a joke in the office that he was a George Clooney lookalike because he's this very sort of dashing, charming, very attractive Italian man. And so we were all sort of joking that we were going to meet George Clooney. I was intrigued by him. I think everybody was. He's an intriguing man. And when we first met, he came around the corner where we were waiting to meet him prior to the interview, and he gave me this sly little smile. He's very flirtatious with men and women. And he gave me the smile, and he looked at me, and something happened. I probably started blushing. I felt like a silly little schoolgirl, and I thought, what is this? And my immediate thought was, whatever the hell that is, let's dismiss that. Let's get rid of it.
Focus.
But I thought it was just like a celebrity crush, like everybody, I was very enamored with Dr. Paolo Macchiarini. The whole world was.
And, I mean, it catapulted your relationship really quickly, It was like lots of romantic gestures from him. You kind of just fell hook, line and sinker for him, I guess. And then he proposed to you in this, very romantic gestures. You were flying all over the world. You were going to Venice. I mean, it was heady, I'm sure, completely.
Yeah, we were friends first, and that's important because I think that's how he began to sort of draw me in. It's this very cunning, meticulous weaving of this web of lies. And I now believe he targeted me from day one. Yeah. And what endeared me to him was he was such a good listener. At the time, I was in a very vulnerable place. My ex-husband, the father of our beautiful then 9-year-old daughter, was dying of brain cancer. And I started talking to Paolo after shoots, pouring my heart out to him. And he was such a good listener, and I thought so caring, because he seemed to care about this little girl that he'd never met. And that's how I got drawn in. I mean, when you're vulnerable, what do you want? You want somebody to put their arms around you and tell you that everything's going to be okay. And he was that person for me. And once I fell for him, it was sort of like a fairy tale, which in hindsight should have been a red flag. You know, it was love bombing on overdrive. It was romance on steroids. I mean, everything was just over the top. But this continued throughout the course of our 2-year relationship. This wasn't just something he did at the beginning. He was incredibly romantic, to the point that people were envious. You know, I'd come home from trips and people would be hanging on the edge of their seat. You know, what did he do now? What did he do now? And people told us that we had renewed their hope and love. So it felt very genuine. Sure. I felt like I was floating on clouds. It was, you know, I was blissfully happy, but it felt real. It felt genuine.
Well, I guess, I mean, for 2 years it was, right? I mean, but when did the suspicions and the seeds of doubt first appear for you? What was it?
The first inkling I had that anything was wrong was in November of 2014. We were supposed to get married on July 11th of 2015. And an article came out in the New York Times talking about allegations of scientific misconduct against him at Karolinska in Sweden. These were not criminal allegations yet. We were talking about misrepresentations in scientific papers. This was the first clue I had that anything like this was going on. And I was angry. I'm his fiance, and he hadn't talked to me about that at all. And that was when I think I first started having some doubts. Little red flags were going off. And in the 6 months preceding our wedding, we were arguing a lot. One of the things that we were arguing about constantly, he had flown me literally all over the world, these beautiful trips everywhere. He had never taken me to Barcelona, which is where we were supposed to be moving after the wedding, where he lived. I was giving up everything. I quit my job. I pulled my daughter out of her very difficult to get into private school, and we were supposed to be riding off into the sunset, living in this house in Barcelona. And I kept saying to him, who the hell marries a man without seeing the house where they're going to live? It just doesn't make sense. And then there were things about the wedding also that were not making sense. I had a lot of questions, but they were small red flags. You know, it wasn't like somebody was standing on a football field with a giant flag saying, alert, alert, con man. But they were building. And then 8 weeks before the wedding is when it all exploded, and when I discovered that he was lying about everything.
You flew to Barcelona, didn't you, Benita? And you went kind of undercover. You had a blonde wig on, and you tell us what you found. Oh. Tell us what you found when you got to Barcelona.
When I first found out that he was lying about everything, I mean, he was literally lying about everything. Nothing about our wedding was true. It was some sick, twisted fantasy in his head, even though we had hundreds of guests coming from all over the world. He allowed people to book plane tickets, book hotels, allowed me to spend money on wedding dresses, on and on and on. None of the venues were ever booked. None of the people, he said, the dignitaries that were coming to the wedding, he didn't know them. It was all some sick, twisted lie. He had told me when I first met him that he was separated, which was well established. He lived in Barcelona. His wife lived in Italy. And he said he had just never gotten divorced because it was complicated. They're Catholic. It's Italy. He told me his divorce was final, and that's why he was able to propose to me. He was never divorced. He never could have legally married me in the first place. But the last piece of the puzzle for me was Barcelona. I knew there had to be a damn good reason. He had never let me go to that house in Barcelona. And so I spent about 2 months investigating him. I hired a private investigator. I was trying to gather all the information I could. Before I confronted him, I wanted hard, indisputable evidence to present him with, because one of the things that he does so well, and he did it not just with me, but with everybody he conned, you know, doctors, scientists, institutions, he's extraordinarily skilled at pulling the wool over people's eyes by convincing you that he's telling the truth. You ask him a question, and he makes you start doubting yourself, you know, because he's rapid fire with his responses. I would never lie to you, and boom, 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 boom. He's got all the facts. So I wanted to go to Barcelona when he didn't know I was coming. It was kind of the surprise attack. I went there with a couple of girlfriends, and what I found was in this house where I was supposed to be moving, and I went there days after what was supposed to be our wedding, he was hiding another family. This was not the Italian wife that he had never divorced. This was another woman and 2 young children. And so now I knew about 3 families. It's me and my daughter in New York, the Italian wife in Italy that he never divorced with 2 children, and now a 3rd family here in Barcelona. And that was the moment for me where I just fell apart. I had been investigating for 2 months and sort of in just hardcore journalist mode. And you see it in Bad Surgeon. I just lose it. It was just, that's when the devastation and the heartbreak really hit me.
You've been
Benita,
through that, Benita.
we hope you're doing it right now, and thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I know it's probably an inhospitable time for you just speaking to us as well, so we appreciate that as well. Thank you. Bad Surgeon, Love Under the Knife is available to stream on Netflix now.
Yeah.
We contacted Mr. Macchiarini's lawyer. He told us his client denies all allegations made against him.